it's Nicole. I'm here today for our team up Thermoweb and Newton's Nook. I'm going to be using some really great Decofoil products as well as this fun stencil and die set from Newton's Nook. I'm going to start off by making a card and then we'll turn it into a layout as well. So I'm going to start with my stencil here and a plain piece of white cardstock, and I'm just going to use purple tape to adhere that into place. You can see I also have some Deco Foil Transfer Gel here, and I'm just going to lightly lay a thin layer of that over top of the stencil. It's kind of hard to see white on white, but I am making just a thin, even layer across the stencil. This is kind of like a snowflakey kind of stencil, and I'm just filling in all the open areas, layering that, and scraping away all the excess. And you really don't need a lot of product for this, so a little bit goes a really long way. The purple tape holds that stencil in place nice and tightly, and I'm now going to set that aside to dry. It only takes a few minutes. So now I have a layout here, a plain piece of white cardstock. This is texture cardstock for the look that I want to have. And I'm just going to very lightly dry brush on with a 1/2-inch paintbrush here a thin amount of Deco Foil Transfer Gel. So you can kind of see where it gets a little bit shiny in places, and I'm really just going very lightly, just dry brushing that on. I'm not using a lot. If you want a thicker look than we have the end of this layout, just add a little bit more transfer gel and you'll pick up more of the transfer sheet once we apply the foil. So for now I'm just adding a thin amount. I just want a very thin watercolory, almost foiled look. So now I'm going to take my dies from Newton's Nook and I'm just going to run them through my manual die cut machine really quick. I'm going to do that to several different pattern paper. I'm not sure exactly what I'm going to do with those yet, so I'm just going to do a whole lot so I have a good amount of options. And I'm just using a paper piercer to poke out the holes in the back of the die, just so I can get all those thin, really intricate shapes loose. So I'm just going to pile these all up together, and the purple tape holds those dies in place really well. So my stenciling is almost done. I'm just because I'm paranoid, I'm going to take my heat gun and just heat it up a little bit to make sure. And I'm going to use the Emerald Watercolor Deco Foil for this because I really wanted to have that green kind of Christmassy look. And it's combined with the gold and the watercolor, so you kind of get two colors for the price of one, all in one shot. So I'm going to run that through over top of my stenciled image, and then I'm going to prepare my cardstock for the leftovers. So you can see that really fun pattern. I promise to show you more of that later. But now I want to take my leftovers from that and use that on my layout. So I'm just going to cut some strips here because I don't want a clean, even look on that background. So I'm just going to cut little bits of strips and run it through a few times through my laminator. I really want this to kind of like have a really whimsical, different look. And you'll see here that that pattern, that polka dot snow pattern, pops out from the leftover from that card. And so I'm going to run it through in a few pieces here and there over my layout. And where the texture has picked up from the leftover piece there, it kind of adds a really soft look with the foil. It kind of makes like a bit of a foiled watercolor wash, for lack of a better term. So I'm just going to keep doing that over and over again until all of my transfer gel that I've painted on the front there is completed. So now I'm just going to cut down my stenciled background here. I'm just going to make a really fun card with that, and just make sure I have all my pieces here for the background here on my layout. Doesn't look like a lot right now, but it's kind of like a watercolor wash, so I don't want a perfectly foiled piece on the white background. So I'm just going to let that run through, and then I'm going to get started here with my card. So I'm just going to take some Distress ink and I'm going to ink right over top of that foil. That's going to kind of tone down the foil just a little bit, but that shiny colors will still shine through, so you kind of get a nice tone on tone effect. So I'm just going to do this with a little bit of this lime green color, and then I'm going to add a secondary color just to add a little bit more depth to that green color. So really quickly I'm just going to go around and kind of highlight those edges with a bit of a darker color. Alright, so back to my layout. I want to finish off with my strips here. You can kind of just see that some pieces are darker, some pieces are lighter, and I'm even using the ones that I've run through before that some of the texture has come off onto the cardstock. I really like that kind of textured look, so that will transfer over back onto the area where the transfer gel is. So none of that is wasted. You can really get a lot from that. So I'm going to finish building my card here. I'm just going to layer that piece onto some cardstock. some white and some lime green Gina K cardstock. And then I'm going to set my layout aside just to finish off my card. Kind of like doing projects where I have one thing done and I kind of get one in a spare. So it's like a twofer all in one kind of sit down to do some crafts. So there's my background for my card, and I'm now just going to finish off with my layout, and I'm going to come to the card at the end. So I kind of have this holiday photo, and I have all these words. I know I want to scatter the words around my page like embellishments rather than using one for a title. And I have some pattern paper. So I've decided I'm going to cut down just some strips of pattern paper here that kind of coordinate with the background as well as all those die cut words. So I'm just going to cut those down, and I end up cutting them into strips just using my scissors. So just 1 inch, I think, by 2 inch strips that I have here. And I'm just going to layer those on my page to create a bit of a background and intermingle them here with my foiled kind of background. So I want the foil to show through, but I want it to almost be like a watercolory foil look. I don't want it to be the star of the show. I want it to be part of the background. So I'm just going to use those pieces of paper and just layer them over top, kind of covering up too the pieces of the foiled area that I'm not super happy with. Maybe I didn't add enough transfer gel, or maybe I added too much. Sometimes if you add a lot, like I did in that top right corner, you'll get a bit of a harsh edge from the edge of the Decofoil. So a great way to hide that is either to add more Decofoil Transfer Gel and repeat the process, or in this case I'm just going to add some pattern paper. So I'm just kind of placing my random pieces of pattern paper here all around my layout, and then once I'm done kind of distributing them all around, I'm using some tape runner to stick that down, and then I'm going to go and sew that all together. I'm using the new Ultra Glue, which is really fun. It's called Ultra Bond Adhesive, and you don't need a lot, and it will stick down those thin delicate words really easily. So I just add a little bit of that along my strips of paper, and then I'm going to continue on embellishing my page. I felt like I needed a few little black drops, so I'll add a little bit of ink for that, and then just tuck in some of these ends with that Ultra Bond glue. I wanted to use some glitter dust photo corners, so I have these here in gold, and I'm just tucking those in like little embellishments on the edges of some of those corners of the pattern paper, just to kind of add a little bit more color versus just the teal and the pink that's kind of going on. So I'm just going to tuck some of those in, and I do have to trim off the bottom part just because my strips were so thin. The best part is these things are adhesive on the back, so you don't have to worry about adhering them down or lick and stick like the old ones used to be. So I'm just going to trim and stick those down really fast. Just a nice way to add a little bit of gold touch to a project. So that's kind of fun. So from here, I'm just going to add some more embellishments later. I'll show you in the close-ups, but I wanted to get finished off on my card. So I have just some random scraps here that I have left over from my layout. I'm trimmed down, and one little stamp for my sentiment. I'm going to stamp at the base, and then I'm going to use those strips to create just a little tiny little Christmas, almost like a Christmas tree, just along that little square that I have that was die cut using the double stitched square set from Gina K. And so I'm just cutting these strips and layering them on the front so we can create a little bit of a Christmas tree. And I will take that to my sewing machine and just kind of stitch a triangle like a tree shape over top of those strips of paper. Then when I'm all done, I'm going to take some 3D foam squares and I'm going to pop that over the front of my card. Thought about adding some of these snowflake shapes, but soon realized with that really busy stenciled background, it was just a little bit too much, so I ended up just adding a simple gold star to the top of my tree, and it saved the snowflakes for my layout. I usually have a bowl with some extra die cuts in it from other projects, and so whenever I'm not sure what I'm going to use, I kind of dig that out. So my gold glitter chipboard piece here, I just use a little Zot to make sure that that sticks right in place. And then I decided to trim my tree out down a little bit because it was a little bit too wide, and it just was a little too wide for the card front. And so with that, I'm just going to layer a few pattern papers in behind the die cut square and then add that to the front of the card, and then my card will pretty much be done. So just really quickly trim that down, get my foam backing off the foam squares, and adding the teal kind of color kind of helps bring out an emerald green that's in that watercolor Decofoil. So that's kind of fun. And I wanted to add a little bit more pink because I do have some pink in the tree on the front of the card. So I just added another little piece of paper there from my stash. And that is pretty much the card. Now back to the layout, or sorry, here's a close-up of that card. You can kind of see that foily background peeking through the Distress ink. I really like how that turns out. Just a really fun, easy way to use some of your scraps. And then here is more close-up of the layout here. You can see the texture from those scraps of the foil transfer using the extra, so you get the reverse of that pattern that was on the stencil. So you can see I added the snowflakes to my layout. I really hope you like how this turned out, and we'll see you again soon at Thermoweb. Bye-bye.